I'm here to talk about the role of prisons. And, hello? Oh, the role of prisons. And the only way we can look at the role of prisons today is that we have to, like with everything, we have to start with a historical perspective. You know, we have to come at it from where it came from, you know, which is something that conservatives don't do. They never look at history, you know, because each day is the beginning for them. Historically, prisons were used to control labor, you know. And I'm not going to go back to the breakup of feudalism and the advent of capitalism, and you know, they pushed all the peasants off the land, etc. But here, I want to start with the slave trade. People call it the slave trade, and at one time I had an insight. And the slave trade, it wasn't really an accurate description of what took place in Africa, on the shores of Africa, what took place on those ships. They weren't slaves, they were prisoners. They were first captured in Africa, on the continent of Africa. They were taken to jails on the shores of Africa, and then they were put on transportation, which you would call them prison ships instead of slave ships. And then they were brought to the New World, and they were put in pens where they were traded off and sold. And then they became slaves on those plantations. And the plantations were nothing more than prisons. It wasn't places that you could come and go. They were controlled by plantation owners, and it's equivalent of what we would call correction officers today. You know, the plantations were surrounded by poor whites, labor that couldn't get jobs because they couldn't compete with slave labor, which was the cheapest form of labor that you could get, right? And so historically, there was a system that was in place, and ultimately it accumulated over 4 million slaves, right? And then we had the Civil War, and suddenly we have 4 million slaves that are freed, and not because of any free the slave movements or the abolition movement. It had nothing to do with that. They were freed simply because it was in the interest of the North, who had won the war on the battlefield, not to lose it in Congress, because the South was better, more populated than the North, right? And so what they had won on the battlefield, they were standing in jeopardy of losing in the political process. So what they did, they freed the slaves. First of all, they freed the slaves to take away that power base, you know, that labor away from the South. And once they did that, no, it's not going to do it. You got to turn the clock off. You want me to do this? All right, so they freed the slaves to take that power away from the South, and then they gave them the right to vote because they knew they were going to vote with those that freed them. And so with every action, there's a reaction. And the pushback from the South was eventually to find a way when the plantation door closed, the prison doors opened wide. So now suddenly we got 4 million freed slaves that have no resources, that are poor, you know, penniless. And so they made laws like vagrancy and petty theft. And they took that and they began to fill the prisons with them, and then sell off their labor from prison. Okay, so we fast forward to the day, and we see that there's very little difference in what took place at the beginning of the slave trade during that period than what's taking place today. All we have to do is look at the poor communities of color, the Harlems of America, and see them as African, right? And what do we have? You know, they round them up, they hold them in the jails, they put them on buses, planes, and trains, and they move them out of their communities, and they move them into these new plantations that we call prisons. You know, and who is the population that are there targeting? They're targeting the populations that are surplus population, surplus labor, throwaway people, social dynamite, the activists of the 60s and 70s. They filled up the prisons with them, and so these are the throwaway people, the expendable people, the surplus labor, and it's the same thing that they filled the prisons with after when they instituted, you know, when they opened up the prison doors in 1865, or began to open them up. So today, we have, according to Michelle Alexander, we have more black men under the control of the criminal justice system than we had in slavery in 1850. Huh? 1850 is 10 years before the Civil War. 10 years before the Civil War, we have more black males under the control of the criminal justice system. We got 2.4 million locked up in jails and prisons, and we got another 5 million under the control of the criminal justice system, either on probation, parole, or some other form of control. So, what has really changed? Nothing has changed, man. Ultimately, we're right back where we're at, you know, where we started. And based on present conditions and projections into the future, it's going to get worse because the American economy is busted. We don't produce anything in this country that's not produced by China, India, Brazil, or all the other emerging economies in the world. So what are our prospects? A continuation of this, right? So, okay, I'm going to finish. The impact of this has been, this has impacted our culture, our youth, and our communities. In terms of culture, we can take a black kid out of Harlem and drop him anywhere, any other community of color around this nation, and he'll fit right in. They wear the same clothes, they got their pants hanging off their ass, talking about, hey, look at me. They're walking down the street. And I mean, everything about them is a perfect fit. It's almost as if they all came to the Polo or the Yankee Stadium and they sat down and say, well, this is what we're going to be. We're going to be drug dealers, we're going to be gangbangers, whatever it is, right? And all of them look the same, they speak the same language. This is systemic. This is the culture. Our communities are just like all the other communities of poor people of color in this country. They turn them into open-air prisons. You know, everywhere we look in these communities, we see flashing lights. You know, we see kids up against the wall. You know, we see our rights being violated. We see the Oscar Grants being killed. It goes on all across America in communities of color. All right, the response to this, what has been the response to this? The response to this by our community of activists and service providers has been a form of boutique activism. Everybody comes and picks out a piece of the problem and they work on it. And ultimately it becomes just individual job programs. Because if you ask the average activist organization out here today in America, ask them what have they done to improve the conditions of prisoners and their families and the communities that they come from, you're going to get silence for the most part. And one exception I've found to that since I've been here is the anti-death penalty movement. You know, you do have significant, concrete successes that you can point to. You manage to work and get people off the death row. So what is the future? The future is that we have to build mass movement. And on that, I'll turn it over to the next speaker so that they can, the thing that they accomplished was wiped out. I mean, literally wiped out. So we saw this expanding population in the prisons. And at the same time, we saw the gradual elimination of the concessions that they made post-Attica.
myself behind the cage, in a cage, because that's what they are, the cages. You know, they put human beings in cages. It's not called correctional facilities, it's not called, not even prisons, just cages, literally. That's what they do. You know? And so as they begin to take back these so-called gains that we had made, it became time again to look at the power relationship between prisoners, between the keepers and the kept. You know? Because since Attica, nobody had really taken a look at that. And in that relationship, the keepers have all the power, and the kept have zero. Right? What had happened is a guy named Bob Ganji, some of y'all may know him from the Correctional Association. He came into a prison I was in, Eastern Correctional Facility. And he came in there and as a representative of his organization, which has been around since the 19th century. And he came in there talking to a group of prisoners just like people were sitting around, exactly like this here. It was in the classroom atmosphere. He came in talking about how he was going to make some improvements, you know, working on making improvements to the prison conditions, you know. And, you know, all of us sitting in this classroom, one thing that a prisoner wants more than anything else is to be free. You know, you can put flat screen TVs up and, you know, give out 4 meals a day, you know, and even raise the pay for the work. I'm not interested. I want to go home. I want to go to my family. I want my life back. Right? So as he was laying out this, I said to myself, I got his attention, and I said, listen, you know, we're not interested in prison reform. You know, we're interested in getting out of here. You know? And so he told me, well, you need to form an organization and you know, address that issue. So that's what I did. I took him literally at his word, and I went out and put together a think tank. And the think tank objective was to research the whole history of prisons in the United States. Right. So naturally we had to go back to Europe, we had to go back to Europe, ancient past, and bring it all the way up to the present. Right. And when our research brought us all the way up to the present, the one thing that stood out among all things was the fact, the primary discovery is that prisoners in the United States, in some states, vote from their prison cells. Right? I mean, that was amazing, you know, because we know I think it wasn't an issue that was raised previously. You know, I don't even think the majority of prisoners wasn't even conscious of this, you know, as an issue. Right? And so when this amazing fact came up, Maine, Massachusetts, Vermont, Utah, you know, they can vote from their cells, but we're Americans too, we're citizens too, you know. And so that became the focus of our attention, because this was the way to empower. At the time, there was virtually almost 70,000 prisoners in New York State. If we got 70,000 prisoners the right to vote, and we voted in a block, we could pick mayors, we could pick congressmen, we could pick governors, you know what I'm saying? Because of the division between the Democratic and Republican Party, we would have a swing vote. And forget about the 70,000 of us that are locked up. Add on 5 family members for each one of us, and you know, numbers just keep going up and up and up. So this was this is where we needed to focus our attention. You know? And so we had competing groups working on that issue. We had a group in Greenhaven, we had a group, my group in Eastern Correctional Facility. The group in Greenhaven, they filed their lawsuit, and they got knocked off in the Second Circuit Court of Appeals of District Court. And so I filed mine in the year of 2000, on the anniversary of the Attica Rebellion. I filed my class action lawsuit. It was called Hayden versus Pataki. At the time, that was the governor. And I wrote to every every civil rights organization in the country. All of them. And all I got back was, no, we busy, and right now, you know, we deal with this issue down here, and we're trying to get a flag put on the Ku Klux Klan flag, taken off the state office building in Alabama or somewhere down south. None of them saw the importance of this issue. You know. And then came the election in Florida and the crisis that arose there around felons and their voting rights and people being eliminated from the list. And at that same time, I came out of prison. I came out of prison after having filed this suit pro se with no legal representation. As soon as this thing broke in Florida, I ended up having 3 law firms. I had the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, Mega Evans Center for Law and Constitutional Rights, and the Community Service Society legal group. All of them represent the suit that I couldn't get nobody to pay attention to. Right? And so the battle began in the courts, and sad to say, the outcome has been less than positive. And the movement that we built, the national movement that we built to try to get the right to vote, okay. Yeah, I tend to drag on, man. I've been involved in so much stuff. I'm really sitting up here and debating what to talk about while I'm talking, you know, because this is just.
Your experience at Attica as well, because I think that might interest people here, but we'll get to that. So, go ahead.
Well, for me, it's still morning. I'll say good afternoon, everyone. I come down here absolutely with no idea of what it is expected of, you know, in terms of what to talk about. But my life has been kind of full, especially on the side of criminal justice and advocacy, especially work around voting rights. For the last decade, that's been the defining issue and what it is I was doing. And started out in prison. Well, let me go back to Attica. Yeah, let me start there. Okay. I got sent to Attica in 1970. You know, after being falsely accused of attempt murder on 2 police men in Harlem. It was a complete frame up. They said the perpetrators were 6'4", 6'5". You know, as you can see, 5 feet, 5.5. I think I lost a half an inch. So they arrested me, you know, after hunting me all over Harlem and had me under $10,000 reward. And they pursued me for a while because naturally I wasn't interested in going to a cage. And I had no faith in the criminal justice system. But eventually I was caught and tried and convicted and given 8.5 to 25 years for this crime committed by a 6'4", 6'5" individual. And they sent me to Attica. And Attica, with the state of mind that I was in, as being a person wrongly convicted, wrongly accused, and wrongly convicted. When I got to Attica, I was in a state of rage. I was in a state of rage from the time that they arrested me and, you know, ultimately convicted me. And this was during a period of upheaval throughout the country. You know, we had the anti-war movement, tail end of the civil rights struggle, Black Power movement. You know, we had the Weathermen, the SDS, the Young Lords, the Black Panthers. And so the country was very much in a period somewhat like what we're in today. You know, it was at a tipping point. Well, because of the pushback against all these movements at that time, the majority of the people that were engaged in these movements, they were being arrested and being locked up. From college campuses to the anti-war movement, to the Weathermen, the SDS, Black Panthers, specifically the black, those that were involved in the Black Power movement. And so when I got to jail on this one, on this false arrest, this frame of the jails were filled with people. The inside, what was taking place outside was transferred inside. So we had a really volatile population in here. You had the underclass, and you had activists, educated people from college campus, people with principles that understood how the system operated, right, and were opposed to it. You got this mixed together in the county jails in here in New York. All of them went up in smoke. To Kings County, all of them had major events that took place in them where they took over the jails. That same population, they took them and moved them up to Attica. Right? And Attica, the stark reality of Attica was that Attica was, the only way that you could really understand Attica is you had to be there. Or you had to be in the New York State prison system at that time. It was nothing like prison system today in many respects. I mean, for me, it was like being transported to another planet. Because the dichotomy between keep and kept was so stark. There was no connections. Here you had a rural upstate population, that had nothing about Harlem, Bed-Stuy, South Bronx, Lower East Side, none of the communities that the majority of prisoners came from. Then you have this revolutionary element also in the mixture, which they had no clue about. Right? And so you bring all this together in this one environment, and what you have is a very volatile mixture. So when I got there, there was already education and just the beginnings of organizing going on there. And it was a pea soup or alphabet soup. Like I said, the SDS, Young Lords, Weathermen, Black Panthers, PLA, and all of them in there pursuing their own interests. But because there was nowhere for us to go, and the true dichotomy in prison is the keeper and the kept, right? So eventually we had to get our act together because the keepers were all speaking in one voice. They were all on the same page, right? They knew exactly what they wanted. They wanted to keep us, right? And so we had to eliminate all the disconnects among our group. And this took place. What we did was end up eliminating all the organizational titles and names. It came together under one banner, which we called the People's Party. Okay? And we held political education classes in the yards. The place was flooded, literally flooded with radical literature. Every revolutionary movement going on the planet, literature there from international publishers used to give out all their stuff. We could get all their stuff for free, right? So we were studying, history, Marxism, the Red Book, the Vietnam War. We were experts on it. The anti-war movement in the country, we were experts on that. We were experts on everything that was anti-American. Right? And it was a beautiful thing. And once we eliminated the group barriers, which place in Georgia recently. You saw a replication of that. Here they organized 6 prisoners with illegal cell phones. But in order to do that, they had to get rid of all these disconnects among them. You know, white, black, Latino, Crips, Bloods. You know, I'm from this town, you from that town. They eliminated all that, you know, which is the only way to go. And I think it's a good lesson for the left out here, you know, because we speak in talk about speaking in tongues. You know, nowhere do we have a common vision or share a common vision of what it is. But in there, we did. And so we began to organize, and we had study groups all over the place. You know, I mean, we had the Latinos with the young lords, they had study groups. Panthers had study groups. We had study groups just for general population. And on Sundays, we would come out and say this was D-Block Yard. That's the yard that I was engaged in. On Sunday, we take all these chairs and line them up. On one side of the yard, we start teaching legal research, you know, how to file an appeal. And so there was some practical elements too. We had to address the needs of the population. And so we grew. And our consciousness, there would be a time when there'd be at least 200 of us doing jumping jacks in the yard. I mean, the dust would be rising up, you know, in a huge cloud. And the officers would be sitting in their chairs like this here. They didn't have a clue what was going on around. So we brought in Commissioner Oswald. We had some conversations with him about things that needed to be changed. Education needed to be brought in, restrictions on visiting. Of course, you had to visit your family through a screen. So your child, your loved one came in, couldn't touch him. And so we addressed some of these issues with him, and he seemed like to be a reasonable man. In any event, 7 days before Attica went up, they reversed the frame up that they had brought me to Attica for, right? 8.5 to 25 years, of course, reversed it. This was in less than a year's time. So they shipped me out to Green Haven, and 7 days later, Attica went up, and I'm sitting in Green Haven watching it on television as it unfolded. Right? And as it unfolded, I'm looking at the cast of characters that rose to the top, you know, and many of them were totally apolitical. You know, and these guys who had that, you know, these were the winemakers, you know, and the guys just doing time. But when the event, when the crisis took place, these are the people that rose to the top. You know? So you never know in a situation like this. We tend to look at just the people around us that come to the meetings and that's engaged in organizing. You know, but there's people out there, you know, in the majority, among the masses, uneducated, apolitical, that when the time comes, they'll be there. So anyhow, I watched this thing unfold on television, and I had my reversal. And I watched the people come in from the outside, from the media, from the representatives of the organizations that were inside. And I'm looking for something spectacular to happen, you know. And I think a lot of people were just taking advantage of the opportunity to get the mic and be in front of the media. Right? Of course, not too long after Rockefeller unleashed madness, you know, with people in that yard and them killing over 39, 40-something people on primetime TV. The whole world is watching what's going on in Attica, and they just slaughtered these people. They just murdered them, man. So like they were, I know it's still there. Yeah. So people people that I knew went down. And America just sent the message to the world, you know, oppose us as supposed to do. Right? And following that, I mean, there were all kinds of reforms took place. They brought in college, you know, conjugal visits. Men in Green Haven, where I was at, they went in the visit room, kicked the screens out there. They didn't wait for them to be brought down. We brought them down personally. And so the change, you know, with every push, there's always a pushback, right? And so they gave us those incremental changes and those reforms. But in the end, they were only privileges that they gave us. They didn't give us rights, right? They didn't empower us, you know. They shut us up. You know, we benefited from those reforms. You know, we had college education, and, which was probably the most important reform that took place in there, because here's a population that, for the most part, were part of that school to prison pipeline. And we have to remember at that time also, at the end of the civil rights struggle, and the passage of the Civil Rights Act of '64 and the Voting Rights Act of '65, the civil rights movement essentially threw up their hands and said, declared victory, and went to work on affirmative action, you know, trying to get the benefits of what they had won. But when they got to the prison wall, they stopped. They didn't come over. And the pushback came with the expansion of that behind the wall population from 300,000 in 1971 to 2.4 million today, right? And so, what did they accomplish with that? You got 2.4 million that can't vote. So there goes the Voting Rights Act, okay? You took away their rights to education, public housing, you know, almost all the benefits of society. You barred them from that. So where was the gains of the Civil Rights Movement? Yeah. What did the Voting Rights Act accomplish? Everything that they accomplished was wiped out.